This is Mr. Eugene, and today we're discussing something that comes with age if you're willing to be honest with yourself. Clarity about where your energy actually goes. There's a point, maybe around 40, maybe sooner for some men, when you start realizing how much time you've wasted chasing things that never really mattered. Things society told you mattered, things other people valued, things you convinced yourself you should care about. But you look back and realize none of it added anything real to your life. This isn't about regret. Regret is looking back and wishing you'd done something different. This is about clarity, seeing clearly, often for the first time, where your energy has been going and making conscious decision about where it should go instead. And before we get into this, let me tell you why this matters to me personally and why I'm willing to discuss it this directly. Because I wasted years, decades honestly, on things that didn't matter. I competed with people whose games I didn't even want to win. I tied my identity to achievements that felt hollow the moment I accomplished them. I forced myself through obligations I resented to earn approval from people whose opinions didn't actually matter. I spent energy trying to change people who were never going to change. And every hour I spent on that nonsense was an hour I wasn't spending on what actually created fulfillment, peace, and meaning. So when I finally developed clarity, when I finally stopped and honestly assessed where my time and energy were going, I made radical changes. I cut people. I quit obligations. I stopped competing. I stopped caring about things that never mattered in the first place, and my quality of life improved immediately and dramatically. Not because I acquired anything new, because I stopped wasting energy on what didn't serve me. That's what clarity provides, permission to stop, permission to redirect finite energy toward what actually matters instead of continuing patterns that never served you just because you've always done them. So if you're here expecting validation for continuing to waste energy on nonsense because that's just how life is, you're in the wrong place. This is about ruthlessly eliminating what doesn't serve you so you can invest in what does. Stay with me. Today we're examining 5 things that are complete wastes of your time after 40, and what you should focus on instead. Competing with other people. Most of us were raised in competition mode. School was competition, grades, rankings, who got into better colleges. Careers were competition, promotions, titles, salary comparisons, who climbed faster. Even personal life became competition. Who has the better house, the better car, the more impressive lifestyle, the more attractive partner. We spend decades on scoreboards measuring ourselves against others. And if you're still doing this past 40, you need to understand you're running circles in place trying to prove something no one's keeping track of anymore. Here's what happens. You see someone your age who just got promoted, or bought a bigger house, or seems to have the perfect situation, and suddenly you feel behind. You feel inadequate. You feel like you're losing some race. But here's the reality check. You don't even want what they have. You're not actually envious of their life. You're just triggered by the comparison, by the feeling that you should be further ahead by now, that you should have more to show for your years. This is complete waste of energy because everyone's playing different games. The guy who got promoted is working 70-hour weeks and hasn't seen his kids in months. The couple with the big house is drowning in debt and fighting constantly. The person with the perfect life on social media is miserable in private. You're comparing your reality to other people's curated presentations. You're competing in races you don't even want to win. You're measuring yourself by standards that don't reflect your actual values or priorities. What to focus on instead? Compete with your past self. The only comparison that matters is, am I better than I was? Am I more aligned with my values than I was 5 years ago? Am I more at peace? More grounded? More myself? If you're more self-aware now than you were at 30, you're winning. If you've developed boundaries you didn't have before, you're winning. If you've eliminated toxic relationships and obligations that drained you, you're winning. If you're living more authentically according to your actual values instead of society's expectations, you're winning in ways most people will never understand. Because most people are still on the hamster wheel, still competing, still measuring, still trying to prove something to people who aren't paying attention. You're free from that. You're measuring progress by internal metrics that actually matter: peace, alignment, authenticity, clarity. And those metrics don't require anyone else to be losing for you to be winning. Stop comparing yourself to others. Start measuring yourself against who you were and who you're becoming. That's the only scoreboard that matters. Tying your identity to your career, this one destroys men particularly hard because we've been conditioned to believe our worth equals our productivity, our title, our income, our professional achievements. For decades, your job was shorthand for who you were. When someone asked, "What do you do?" you gave your title. Engineer, manager, director, entrepreneur. That title carried weight. It communicated status, competence, worth. Maybe you introduced yourself that way for 30 years. Your business card defined you. Your LinkedIn profile was your identity. Your professional network was your social circle. Everything about who you were revolved around what you did for income. And then something shifts. Maybe you retire. Maybe you get laid off. Maybe you just outgrow the role and realize you don't care about it anymore. Maybe your company collapses or your industry changes or you realize the career you built doesn't align with who you've become. And suddenly you don't know who you are because your entire identity was built on that title, that role, that professional identity. And without it, you feel like nobody, like you don't matter, like you've lost yourself. This is the trap of tying identity to career. When the career ends or changes, you experience identity crisis because you never develop sense of self independent of what you do for income. And here's the brutal reality: nobody actually cares about your job title as much as you think they do. The people who valued you for your title were using you for access or status. The people who actually care about you care about who you are, not what you do. What to focus on instead: develop identity independent of career. Who are you when you're not working? What makes you feel alive when no one's paying you for it? What would you do with your time if income wasn't a consideration? What contributions do you want to make that have nothing to do with professional advancement? Maybe it's craft or skill you develop for its own sake. Maybe it's community involvement or mentorship. Maybe it's creative pursuits or intellectual exploration. Maybe it's relationships and experiences you've neglected while climbing professional ladders. The second chapter of life isn't about climbing higher in same domains. It's about going deeper into what actually matters to you beyond external validation and professional achievement. When you're 80, you won't be proud of your job titles. You'll be proud of who you became, what you contributed, how you treated people, what you created that mattered beyond paychecks. Start building that identity now. Invest in curiosity, creativity, contribution, the things that define you beyond what pays the bills. So when career chapter ends, you don't lose yourself. You just shift focus to dimensions of identity you've been developing all along. 3. Tolerating energy vampires. You know exactly who I'm talking about. People who only reach out when they need something. Friends who turn every conversation back to themselves. Acquaintances who leave you feeling drained every single time you interact. Family members who create drama constantly and expect you to manage it. These aren't necessarily bad people, they're just expensive. And after 40, you realize you can't afford them anymore. Every hour you spend with someone who depletes you is an hour you're not spending with people who energize you, or in solitude if that's what you prefer. Every conversation that leaves you exhausted is energy you could have invested in something that actually matters. And here's what you need to understand. You don't owe anyone your presence just because they're used to having it. You don't owe anyone your time and energy just because you've given it before. You don't owe anyone access to you just because they expect it. Energy is finite resource. Your time is finite resource. Your emotional capacity is finite resource. And spending those resources on people who consistently take more than they give, who drain more than they contribute, who demand more than they reciprocate, that's bad investment that guarantees negative returns. When you were younger, maybe you tolerated this because you thought it was what good people do, because you were taught that loyalty means accepting people as they are even when, as they are, is toxic or draining, because you felt guilty setting boundaries or creating distance. But after 40, if you're paying attention, you realize protecting your energy isn't selfish. It's necessary. It's self-respect. It's recognizing that your finite time and energy should be invested in relationships that are reciprocal, healthy, and mutually beneficial, not extracted by people who view you as resource to be used. What to focus on instead: invest in reciprocal relationships. Spend your time with people who energize you, people who give as much as they take, people who value your presence and show it through their actions, people who leave you feeling better after interactions, not worse. This doesn't mean everyone has to serve your needs perfectly. It means the overall dynamic should be balanced. Both parties should be contributing. Both parties should be benefiting. Both parties should feel valued. And when you realize a relationship is consistently one-sided, when you're always giving and they're always taking, when you always initiate and they never reach out, when you're always supporting and they're never available, you're allowed to create distance. You're allowed to stop. You're allowed to redirect that energy toward people who actually appreciate it and reciprocate it. It's not cruel to stop giving your energy to people who don't value it. It's just accurate assessment of where your finite resources should go. Spend them on people who reciprocate. Stop wasting them on people who just extract. Doing things because you think you're supposed to. How much of your life is spent doing things out of obligation? Not obligations you've consciously chosen or commitments you actually value, but things you do because you think you're supposed to, because you'll be judged if you don't, because people expect it, because saying no feels impossible even though saying yes feels terrible. You're at another family gathering you didn't want to attend, another social obligation you accepted out of guilt, another favor for someone who never reciprocates, another commitment you made not because you wanted to, but because you couldn't figure out how to say no without feeling like a bad person. And you're miserable, resentful, exhausted, because you're spending your finite time and energy on things you don't want to do for people who probably wouldn't do the same for you. There's a difference between genuine service and people-pleasing. One comes from choice and healthy self-sacrifice, where you're genuinely willing to give because it aligns with your values. The other comes from fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as selfish or uncaring. When you do things out of obligation rooted in fear, you're not actually being kind or generous. You're being resentful. You're giving begrudgingly while wishing you could be somewhere else. And that resentment poisons both you and the relationship. And here's the kicker. Most of the time, the people you're doing these things for don't even value them that much. They've just gotten used to you saying yes. They expect your compliance because you've always complied. But if you stopped, they'd adjust. They'd find someone else. They'd manage without you. You're not actually obligated. You're just conditioned to feel obligated. And that conditioning is costing you your life. Hours, days, years spent doing things you don't want to do because you can't tolerate the discomfort of saying no. What to focus on instead, give from choice, not obligation. Do things for others because you genuinely want to, because it aligns with your values, because you're choosing to prioritize that relationship or that cause, not because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't. When you give from choice, you give fully, without resentment, without keeping score, without feeling depleted, because you chose it. You decided that this use of your time and energy serves your values and priorities. And when something doesn't serve your values and priorities, you say no, clearly, without elaborate justification. I'm not available for that is complete sentence. You don't owe anyone explanation for how you spend your finite resources. This shift from obligation to choice transforms your life, because suddenly you're only doing things you've consciously chosen to do, things that align with your values, things that don't leave you resentful. And the energy you recover from eliminating obligatory nonsense becomes available for what actually matters to you, expecting people to be different than they are. This is one of the last illusions to die in midlife, the belief that people will eventually become who you wish they were, that if you just explain it right, or wait long enough, or love them hard enough, they'll change into the person you need them to be. They won't. And holding on to that fantasy keeps you stuck in cycles of disappointment, frustration, and resentment that waste years of your life. Now let me be clear. Having standards isn't the problem. You should absolutely expect honesty, respect, effort, and basic decency in relationships. Those aren't unreasonable expectations. They're foundation of healthy relationships. But here's the distinction. It's one thing to expect certain behavior because it's baseline requirement for healthy relationship. It's another thing entirely to keep expecting that behavior from someone who's consistently shown you they're not capable of providing it or not willing to provide it. Your expectation might be reasonable, but your continued insistence that this specific person will eventually meet that reasonable expectation, despite years of evidence to the contrary, that's where you start losing yourself. Your friend who's always late will probably be late next time too. Your sibling who never follows through will keep flaking. Your partner who's never been emotionally available isn't likely to suddenly transform because you finally explained your needs the right way. You can ask for change, you can communicate clearly, you can express your needs, but at some point, reality wins. When someone repeatedly shows you who they are through their consistent behavior over time, believe them. Stop waiting for them to become someone else. Because here's what happens when you keep expecting people to change, you waste your life waiting. You stay in relationships that don't serve you hoping they'll improve. You tolerate treatment you shouldn't tolerate because you believe it's temporary, that they'll eventually grow, that this isn't really who they are. But it is who they are. Their behavior isn't aberration, it's pattern. And patterns don't change just because you want them to. They change when the person decides to do the difficult work of changing, and most people never decide to do that work. What to focus on instead, accept reality without bitterness. See people as they actually are, not as you hope they'll become. Accept that their current behavior is their actual behavior, not temporary phase they're going through. This doesn't mean giving up on standards. It means recognizing the moment when holding on to hope turns into self-betrayal, when you're ignoring evidence in front of you to maintain fantasy about who they could be if only they'd try. Once you stop expecting people to become someone else, you're free to make honest decision. Can I accept this person as they actually are? Can I have relationship with who they are now, not who I wish they were? If yes, then accept them fully. Stop trying to change them. Stop being disappointed that they're not different. Work with reality. If no, then create distance. Not with bitterness or anger, but with clarity. This person, as they actually are, isn't compatible with what I need in relationship, and that's okay. I can wish them well while choosing not to continue investing in a relationship that doesn't work. The freedom comes not from changing them, you can't, but from reclaiming your clarity about who they are and making decisions based on reality instead of hope. The common thread, notice the pattern across all 5 of these? They're all about energy management, about recognizing where your finite time, energy, and emotional capacity are going and making conscious decisions about whether that investment serves you. Competition wastes energy on external validation that doesn't matter. Career identity wastes energy on single dimension of self. Energy vampires extract energy without reciprocating. Obligatory activities waste energy on things you don't value. Expecting people to change wastes energy on fantasy instead of reality. All five are energy drains, ways you're hemorrhaging your finite resources on things that don't create value, meaning, peace, or fulfillment in your life. And after 40, if you're paying attention, you start realizing, I don't have infinite time, I don't have infinite energy, I don't have infinite emotional capacity. So I need to be strategic about where those resources go. This isn't selfishness, this is stewardship. This is recognizing that your life is finite and your energy is precious. And wasting either on things that don't matter is the real tragedy, what actually matters. So if you're eliminating these 5 energy drains, what should you focus on instead? What's worth your finite time and energy? Internal alignment. Living according to your actual values instead of performing for others. Making decisions that feel right internally even when they don't look impressive. Externally meaningful relationships. Investing deeply in a handful of reciprocal relationships that energize you instead of spreading yourself thin across dozens of draining ones. Contribution that matters to you. Creating value, helping others, building something, solving problems in domains you actually care about, not for external validation, but because it's meaningful to you. Growth and learning. Developing skills, exploring ideas, pursuing curiosity, becoming a more capable version of yourself, not to compete with others, but because growth itself is satisfying. Peace. Eliminating sources of unnecessary stress, drama, and chaos. Protecting your mental and emotional space from things and people that disturb it without providing value. These are the things that actually create fulfillment after 40. Not achievements, not accumulation, not external validation, not winning competitions, but internal alignment, meaningful connection, valuable contribution, continuous growth, and hard-won peace. Final thoughts, let me tell you why I'm sharing this, despite knowing some people will call it cynical or negative or pessimistic. Because it's not negative. It's clarity. It's recognizing what doesn't serve you so you can invest in what does. It's eliminating energy drains so you have energy for what matters. I spent too many years on these 5 drains, competing with people, tying my identity to career, tolerating energy vampires, doing obligatory nonsense, expecting people to change, and every hour I spent on those things was hour I didn't spend on what actually created fulfillment. When I finally developed clarity and eliminated these drains, my life improved immediately. Not because I added anything, because I stopped wasting energy on what didn't matter. And the energy I recovered became available for relationships, pursuits, and experiences that actually created value. This channel exists because I got tired of watching men waste their lives on things that don't matter, chasing validation they don't need, maintaining relationships that drain them, accepting obligations they resent, hoping people will change when they won't. So if this resonated, if you recognize yourself in any of these 5 patterns, make the changes. Eliminate the drains. Reclaim your energy. Invest it in what actually matters to you. Drop a comment about which of these 5 resonated most. Which energy drain are you going to eliminate? What are you going to focus on instead? Share so other men learn from your clarity. Subscribe for more truth about what actually matters after 40 versus what society tells you should matter. Because this channel will never tell you to keep wasting energy on nonsense. Will never encourage you to maintain draining relationships out of obligation. Will never suggest you keep competing in races you don't want to win. Your time is finite. Your energy is finite. Spend both on what actually matters. Everything else is waste.